Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Robert Tomaszewski. I'm an analyst in the Polityka Insight for energy issues. I will run today's webinar on how to modernize Polish heating industry till 2030. The meeting is going to be held in Polish. If you want to use interpretation into English, please make sure you're using the newest version of Zoom. Detailed information can be found in our chat. And now, very brief information for our English speaker participants. And back to Polish. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very, very pleased to meet you today. Well, the very first of our webinar will be devoted to the presentation of the newest report of Polityka Insight on district heating systems and the place we are at, what's going to happen in future with the changes associated with the heating transformation that we see and hear about from the west of Europe. And the second part will be devoted to a debate on how to reform the sector. Well, obviously, it will be possible to ask questions if you would use the chat window for it at the end of our webinar. It will be possible to discuss matters and to present your points of view as well. I would present our panelists now. Adam Dobrowolski, Director of the Energy and Heat Markets in. Thank you very much for the invitation. Mariusz Majkut, the President of E.ON Energy and the head member of the Polish Energy and Heat Chamber. Piotr Sprzączak, the head of the heating department in the Ministry of Climate and Environment, and Jacek, Szymczak, the president of the board of Polish Heating Chamber. Gentlemen, very good morning, and I will now start a very short presentation of the most important assumptions from our report. The report, which I hope will broaden the scope of our discussion on the future directions of the heating sector reform. Okay, you can see the report now. Well, I would like to start by saying where we are vis-a-vis the condition of the Polish heating systems and heating industry. And obviously, our assumptions stem from the newest data that were published by the Energy Regulation Office and Eurostat. They are not optimistic. So the Polish heating industry is dated, and all the time it's struggling with problems associated with old generation and transfer infrastructure. Well, our systems were built mainly in the 60s and 70s of the 20th century, and all the time we based on the second generation with certain examples that show that modernization may run a little bit faster in bigger conurbations. Well, the main differentiation factor is obviously the temperature of heat delivered to the user. In Poland, all the time the heat is very, very hot, which means that losses in transfer are very high, and the ability to integrate other sources of heat is really limited when you compare us to Scandinavia or the German sector, where in fact modern heating systems of the new generation are developing significantly faster. And it also looked like that in parts. And this is the very first point that I wanted to make. Another point, yes, here, well, the slide has changed. Here we see the division, which unfortunately concerns the division into smaller and bigger towns and development of modern heating systems in these places. Well, you can see that effective heating systems, these systems which to 50% use heat from renewable sources of energy, waste heat or cogeneration, they are mostly focused in big conurbations. All the time, the small heating systems, here we are struggling with the problem that they are far less effective. And well, now 80% of systems in small towns are ineffective. And the lower you go in the town size, then the data deteriorates even further. In cities with up to 50,000 people, only 10% of heating systems are effective. So it just shows the scale of the variation or diversification in the sector, and also the size of the challenge associated with the reform, as well as the possibilities of investment in the sector. Well, in our presentation, our report, we focused on selecting the factors that demonstrate where we are with the modernization of the sector. So how we have 5 sectors defined. So the first thing here is decarbonization. The title of the slide is misleading. It's about decarbonization, not renewable energy. Renewable energy will be tackled in a moment, so it's a mistake. But the problem is that our heat industry is most dependent on coal in Europe. The Eurostat data shows it clearly that all the time 79% of the heat generated in Poland is based on coal, and the information from the regulator, for the Polish regulator, that's sort of more optimistic because it presents the heating industry that's covered by concession. So it just demonstrates that the heat generated, only 71% is dependent on coal. However, what I would like to attract your attention to is the fact that for 10 years, we haven't made a step forward in catching up with the rest of Europe in decarbonization. And here in the right graph, you can see the distance between us and the main EU. As for the share of coal in heat production during the last decade, it decreased in a minimum way, not more than 1 percentage point. So the work in acceleration of decarbonization is huge, and it's still in front of us. And now we will talk about the renewable sources of energy. So the title of the slide is correct. Well, I would say that now it is a little bit more optimistic. You can see nearly 15%, yes? However, still we are below the EU average, which is 21%. And as you can see in the slide, the distance between us and the EU and the last 10 years, you can see during the last 10 years, the distance increased in spite of the fact that we increase the share of renewable energy sources in heat production in Poland. So we can be 100% sure that we won't manage to meet the EU target associated with heat and coal production. So the level of 17% of renewable energy share. Well, as for more optimistic factors analyzed, obviously we may see and highlight emissions. They decreased. As of 2002, the emissions in heating industry decreased by 30%. Intensity, or rather how many tons of CO2 we need per 1 unit of energy, has also increased. Now, 1/5. That is obviously associated with modernization processes that have been made in our sector. But you see, all the time the distance between us and the rest of the EU is gigantic, and it corresponds, well, we have twice higher emission rates than the rest of the continent. And well, obviously, perhaps we should make a little technical note. Well, obviously, the Polish system, heating district heating systems, they are very different, and you can't really compare it against the rest of the continent because the share of it is pretty high, just like in the previous Eastern Bloc countries where the grids were developed, which is not changing the fact, however, that all the time we have to struggle with with the coal heritage that we are burdened with, and we have to try and limit it somehow. Another thing that stands out as for the optimistic look on the sector is the efficiency of heat production. It's higher in Poland than in the rest of the continent. And this is obviously also an achievement, well, just like the emission rate, it is also an achievement of the modernization processes. And also an EU impulse played a role, as well as the modernizations that were started at the beginning of the previous decade, which forced heating companies to start the necessary modernizations. And you can see it, heat losses are shrinking. However, still they remain at this level of nearly 9% of the production, which is comparable to the EU mean. So we can say that the work was done correctly. And also the effectiveness of the work itself, productivity of the work itself, after 10 years, it increased nearly 3 times, which obviously was associated with the fact that in the heating establishments, the headcount was reduced by nearly 50%, which obviously translated into this index as well. However, if you compare financial results of German companies to Polish heating companies, the scale, as you can see it in the chart here, the distance between us and them is still gigantic. So the space to improve efficiency of companies is still big, in our opinion, and a lot shall be changed in the years to come. All right, and now a very pessimistic, indeed, a picture of the financial situation that's changing for the worst of the heating companies. And obviously, it's associated with the increasing prices of emission allowances, which reduce the production of heat based on coal. In 2019, for the very first time in 6 years, heating companies were not able to cover their costs with revenues. So 500 million of losses, it was the loss of the sector in total, which was obviously associated with the growing prices of emission allowances. As of 2017, these prices show a very stable upwards trend, which obviously translated, ladies and gentlemen, into the price of heat. In 2019, it was 41 zloty on average, so 8% higher than the year before. And this financial situation here, obviously, is associated with challenges that the sector sees all the time. So accelerating transformation of the EU economy and new regulations associated with the European Green Deal come to the regulations that the sector has to adopt to. And obviously, the key role here is played by the BAT conclusions, the MCP directive, and the Renewable Energy Directive. Our sector is forced to quickly increase the share of renewable energy sources in heat production. And just for a moment, I'll stop here with the conclusions, because they are absolutely the key for the years to come. And this is really the perspective of the functioning and development of the industry, something that's really most important. And they obviously refer to bigger units, over 50 megawatts. And now only 1 out of 4 of national heat plants would meet the requirements on emissions, which may make you feel a little bit worried about the future. However, the data of the energy regulator for the last year show that most companies already have started the investment. They are adjusting to BAT conclusions, which should sort of calm us down. But on the other hand, we do know that in future, the EU will rise the bar as for emissions. And even if we manage, as the heating sector, if on the 1st of January 2023, we are technically ready, in the following years, the situation may change definitely for the worse. Well, obviously, smaller units have a little bit more time. The MCP directive, as for smaller heating installations, it offers 2 thresholds So we have 2025 and 2030, the time to adjust to the requirement. However, on the other hand, the year 2030 would be like the check-up moment for the sector, and the report shows that many heating plants will just not survive, will not be able. They will have to stop their activity. Those that don't adjust will be punished. And here I have to say that the risk is pretty high, because a middle-sized heating plant with the power of 100 of megawatts have to think about it. If they don't adapt to the conclusions, they will be punished even at the level of 100 million zloty annually. And simply this will be paid by the users, which obviously translates into gigantic social risk, especially in case of those that don't have the money to pay their bills. And now, obviously, the main challenge is what's going to happen with the prices of CO2. And what we present here in the slide, in the prognosis, this is the cake report. So what's going to happen with the prices in the perspective of 2030 if the reduction targets are increased into 55%? We can see that over 70 euro level, it will kill coal. Everyone knows about it, and we know that there's no stepping back. And obviously, we have to see what's going to happen during the meeting in December, whether, the veto of Poland and Hungary definitely during the budget discussions would matter, but the level of 55% of reductions will be adopted, and then the prices will grow and make heating plants push out of the market those that are based on coal.
So what is threatening to the sector? It is the key question that actually heating plants have to face. The biggest risk is, of course, that the ongoing changes will be faced by the smaller users. Actually, they will have to get disconnected from the heating networks, and Poland in such situation would not use the huge potential that we have in the systemic heating systems to reform energy sector, to reform the economy in the direction of the climate neutrality, using the heat carrier that can be a stabilizing factor for the energy sector. As a consequence of that, as a consequence of disconnecting from the networks, could be actually entering a kind of a spiral of death for the whole sector, which is about deterioration of the quality of air, because the users that will get disconnected from the systemic heating from the heating systems, they will probably use the old ovens that would be used in the households, and there is a risk that we have to be aware of. The last but not least are the recommendations in the report, something that we would have to think about, something that we should treat as a starting point for the further discussion that we are going to start in a moment with our guests. So we are planning some obvious steps that should be reminded, we should be aware of them. So the first step and the first stage that should actually be the starting point for the further discussion on how to modernize the sector is the climate neutrality adopted by Poland. Poland is the only country that did not do it, and there is a very simple reason for that: availability to the financial resources to modernize the sector. Without that, actually, Poland will not be able to use the fund of the just transformation to transform and to modernize the heating sector and the power sector. Bearing in mind all these investment needs of the heating systems, 70 to 100 billion zlotys by the end of this financial perspective. So without this financial support, we will not be able to do it ourselves. The second thing is the co-generation, focus on co-generation. We already have existing support system. The co-generation in the first stage will, of course, be focused on gas, and then we're going to use biomass, sun, solar energy, wind energy. So mixed systems will come into play as well. The other thing is to make tariffs more flexible. We believe that this tariffication model should be more flexible, and it should bring the better tariffs so that the plants are able to find funds to invest, bigger funds to invest. So you cannot just we cannot forget it. It has to be combined with implementation of the mechanism of the users that are specifically vulnerable, because the risk of the energy poverty on a large scale is quite big. Therefore, the state should create conditions to actually protect the vulnerable users. And our discussion on the modernization of the system, discussion that follows new strategies, new reports on the heating systems in Poland, we forget about the systems of new generation. And in our Polityka Insight new report, we focus a little bit more on the challenge that we'll have to face here. So we believe that the switch to the low temperature networks is absolutely necessary, and it has to be correlated with thermal modernization of the buildings. We have to use this huge chance that appeared from Brussels. The wave of renovations. We should use this wave of renovations to improve the thermal value of the buildings in Poland. So that this process is correlated with the process of replacement of old networks by the new low temperature networks. This will allow us for integration of the renewable energy resources. The heat, waste heat and the industrial heat actually could then be used in the new systems, and this will create new possibilities, new chances, new options. Examples of the Danish agglomerations prove that even based on this old infrastructure, such investments are possible. And we are discussing this broader in our report. Again, I would like to encourage you to get acquainted with the content of the report. This is definitely the direction we should follow and we should adopt. Of course, integration of the heating system and the energy system is absolutely unavoidable. Co-generation is unavoidable, and the state should already now create a roadmap how to bring these industries together. And of course, we hope we have a great hope in the power to heat systems. This will allow us actually to use the surpluses from the renewable energy resources to produce heat. And of course, this will be a very useful solution for both industries. It will stabilize the energy systems. It will allow to produce better and cleaner heat. So electrification of the system is absolutely necessary, and we will have to have a roadmap for that that will show us actually how to make it in the upcoming stages. So we cannot forget well, we cannot actually limit ourselves to the perspective of 2030. We have to remember perspective of 2050 and the climate neutrality. So the most important thing here is actually to make such a structural reform in such a way that it creates an entry gate actually for the waste heat to be used actually in heating systems. Half of this heat right now in the industry is emitted to the atmosphere and is actually not used where it could be used. And for instance, it could be used for heating systems to heat houses, households, the production industrial areas. So server rooms actually create great opportunity here. The great IT databases where Poland, but that are actually, we have more and more of them in Poland. We should think actually who to use them actually to contribute to stabilization of these modern heating systems. They can produce heat that could be then received by end users. And again, in our report, we are discussing example of Denmark, where these kind of projects are being implemented already right now. There are companies who build their server rooms in the Danish cities and towns, connecting them with their heating systems. So this is a great potential that should be definitely used here as well. Of course, it is referring to the digitalization of heat. We are discussing, all the decision makers, all the experts dealing with the transformation of the energy systems are talking about it. Smart building systems, the IT solutions definitely can allow us actually to limit the costs of the industries by 30%. So the loss of transmission should also be on the agenda, how to support these great projects. So just coming to an end of my presentation, let me draw your attention to the hydrogen and the hydrogen revolution that is actually ahead of us, and something that together with biomethane and biogas, hydrogen can be actually this driving force for transformation of the sector already around 2030. Already now we should think how to use hydrogen so that we can produce green energy, green heat, so that we can move away from the fossil fuels. This cogeneration, hydrogen cogeneration that actually heating systems, heating plants already investing now, and the state is actually encouraging for these investments. It has a limited actually time to be used. And now the heating plants, should already think how their installations can be used in the future, how can be changed, amended to be able to combustion of hydrogen as well. Let me finish my presentation here. Thank you very much for your attention. And now I would like to move on to the discussion with the guests. So first, let me address Mr. Szymczak, Director from the Ministry of Climate and Environment. I would like to ask you, sir, what is the perspective of the ministry? What the ministry actually is thinking about the reform of the sector specifically? Can you see this perspective of changes in the heat tariffs? If so, which direction you're going to take and how this should be done? Over to Mr. Sprzączak. Thank you very much. Thank you for the question. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to thank you for inviting me to this panel. When it comes to our perspective, it is definitely actually the fact that the Department of Heating was established means that the minister is aware of changes that we are faced actually by the sector. So the role of the assets must be, of course, appreciated, and they have to be used because they are so substantial and significant in the process of the Polish transformation. As you noticed, the heating systems have to play an important role here. In the past, in the recent years, it was a little bit forgotten. The investment processes, actually, as we could have seen on your diagrams, were not actually going so fast as we would like them to move on. The energy mix was not changed. But on the other hand, over a dozen of last years, actually, there was no need actually to change this energy, or no option to change the energy mix. In 2018, when we adopted clean energy package in the whole Europe, and still in 2019, the national plans with the perspective up to 2040 were actually adopted. They did not refer to the climate neutrality on the European level. So we have to be aware that these changes are ongoing, and they are ongoing very quickly. We have to be ready to adapt to them. We cannot actually forget about the reality. We have to take it as a challenge. And I believe that the heating sector, from the perspective of the broad transformation of Polish energy sector, is an important asset. As you actually said, when it comes to power to heat program, when we use the electric energy surpluses, storage, and using it actually to produce heat, it's a very important idea. We really consider it seriously, and summarizing the strategy for the heating sector prepared, developed by the ministry, refers to majority of the topics that you've already mentioned in your presentation and in your report. So I fully agree when it comes to the development of the low temperature networks and change of philosophy and thinking about the heating system based on the single source to the most and switch to a more distributed system. This is definitely the direction that we have to take. It's a new natural direction to move on.
So we may talk about 400 systems that are very individualized. They have their own conditions of operation. You have to remember that we also have industrial users that require heat of specific parameters. So it shouldn't be so that we leave them there and change the work paradigm and system functioning. However, well, definitely it is a very important element that should be used, for example, in construction of new living quarters. Well, new living quarters have very special requirements as for energy standards. Energy standards and the share of renewable energy. Simply the thermal efficiency of the buildings requires certain things. So new technologies, heat pumps, low temperature grids will play a very important role there. And now back to the tariffs, the subject that you tackled upon. Well, yes, obviously the situation in which they are not covered. I mean, the main costs of company operation are not covered. Such a situation cannot last too long. And as I say, the sector which, well, with its power, I would say that it's even bigger than the electrical energy sector, because it's what, 55 gigawatt of installed power in heat, so installed capacity in heat. So you can't, they have to be more dynamic. I mean, the tariffs have to change more dynamically and take account of things. And recently, for example, there was a change of the tariff ordinance to take account of growing prices of CO2 emission allowances. And surely it's not an all-embracive, it's not a systemic solution, but we do see a need to have a more flexible approach to the tariffs. And in our opinion, what is needed is an encouragement for companies to invest in renewable sources of energy, to at least partially get disconnected from the allowance prices, and to have, the association with other parameters, not only this one. On a longer run, it won't be a good road. So the share of renewable sources must increase, and policy should also pressurize towards this direction. All right, a question. Do you already have a perspective or some clarity on how the potential change of tariffs would look like? Do you see anything in the horizon? Because you see, for sure, there's a problem and you are aware of it, but do you know when you would like to solve it, or at least propose some solutions for the issue, or the regulation of the issue? Well, all the time the work is in progress. We are working on legal acts that would implement the two directives in heating industry. So it's about increasing the share of renewable energy by 1.1%. And we will propose certain changes concerning the tariffs and promotion of renewable energy sources. However, now I wouldn't like to talk about the details because, the document has not been made public yet. It has not been accepted at all the echelons in the ministry. So it's not a formal position. I can't talk too much about it. So just want to think, just very last question to you in this round of questions, when the document, the strategy for the heating sector will be published? I remember Minister Polityka several years ago said it would be the first quarter next Yeah. Do we know something more specific about the date? Or no, we are still using the term first quarter 2021, and I hope that then it will be sent for consultations. All right, thank you very much, Director. And now I would like to ask a question to Director Dobrowolski, and we'll continue the subject of tariffs. I would like to ask you about the perspective of the regulator concerning the potential changes in the tariffs, how the regulator would see the needs of changes, and what do you think about your dialogue with heat establishments in the years to come? Obviously, the legislator has the upper hand in shaping the system. However, for us, it would be a very good thing to hear the perspective of the regulator, how you see it, what direction would be ideal for future. All right, once again, thank you very much for the invitation. First, I would say as follows. Well, the situation of the heating industry and numbers. Well, it is a certain image that's impacted by enterprises themselves when they present their costs and revenues. And what we paid attention to in our publication is the fact that you have to have a good look at the signals that appeared in 2019. You have to assess what is happening now and what potential consequences might be there. So analysis are being continued, and one of them suggests something very important, namely the way, or maybe rather the result in the heating industry results from very many factors. And one of the important factors is the way in which costs are allocated, and also the way cost forecasts are made, and also the cost policy in various cost areas. And these things have a great impact on the results. And also, at the current situation, the system perhaps is not as efficient and quick in changing as some people would like it, but it is functioning. And when we talk about companies that invest 30, 40, I mean, the perspective of the investment is 30, 40 years. In such cases, the perspective of 1 year is not terribly long term, and the costs are rolled over. You have to see that the system is reactive. And if years 2018 and 19, we had abrupt and big changes in costs of production. I'm thinking about the media, CO2 and coal. You know, sometimes during 12 months, the tariffs changed twice or three times. Users are not terribly happy about it because it's just like the director said it, that it's hard to plan your activity in such circumstances. You can't plan the cost in case of industry and in case of building cooperatives. It's really hard to plan the heating budget. So here, well, the reactions were very nervous indeed. And you have to say that everything positive that happens in the heating industry, well, investments increased annually to over 3 billion zloty, and the user is paying. The user by paying the tariffs or by paying taxes that are also used for installments that may pay to the EU, which afterwards very often come back to us in higher amounts in form of investment funds, economic growth, but also investment in heat sources. So, well, in our opinion, the current system, if we want to analyze it deeply, we just have to check what can be made better in the system. I can't really imagine a situation when, well, the tariffs change automatically only and solely because one of the costs um, uh, that does not depend on the entrepreneur is increasing in a specific amount of time, and the regulator is not able to assess whether the company did everything they could in those circumstances to keep the cost at a reasonable level. So just an example from 2020 and the power sector, the gap can be huge, not only in heating, but also in power sector. So I would say that this is very, very important indeed. And well, the tariff system, if it is supposed to support investment, it should be used in such a way that the resources obtained by companies in depreciation and return on investment could be used for further investments. They shouldn't be consumed in other ways. Profitability out to 20%. And again, we are a situation when users have to pay over 5 billion zloty annually for some impulses for investments, so that we could keep energy security in the area of electricity supply. We have to build a system in which we will have a kind of matrix in which we would be able to see, first of all, what is it that companies want to do, what conditions will be achieved, what effects will be produced by investment, how we would like to monitor them, and afterwards, how we would analyze the investments. Because the transfer of resources to a company is not a guarantee yet that the resources would be used for investments, even in the companies that behave, say, in a very responsible way. And in a situation when, as you have said, many companies belong to local authorities, and it's obvious that the owner is the town, which very often impacts the behavior of the entrepreneur, especially in politically unstable times. If the reform, yes. If it is to be about negating the previous regulation system, I think it would not be acceptable. And not only from the point of view of the economy, but also from the point of view of the purchasing power of the Polish consumer. And here you have to say these investments shall be based on a single assumption. We will see certain benefits of transformation, and some money should also come to investment, and the smallest ones that are at the hardest situation, they should be supported. The investment should be supported by subsidies, and obviously these subsidies must not breach the policy associated with public support of the EU, or if not subsidies, or perhaps low interest bank loans. Because basically in small enterprises, what is missing is the potential to execute an investment that you can see in other places, like an investment in the grid to a not across the system, but just a part of the system. Then the expectation of the rate increase is like 30 or 50%. So here the system must be tailor-made, but on the other hand, it also has to have all the locks and buttons and zips and all the accessories. So simply when after 10 years we make the final assessment of our achievements, we should be able to show tangible effects, and not just to say that our investment increased 3 times during the energy law functioning. Thank you. Thank you very much, Director, for your super interesting intervention. And now I would like to talk to the industry, and I would ask the President Szymczak to present his position on what we have just heard from Director Dobrowolski. And what's going on now? What is it that the industry needs? And is it so that, well, really, a very simple flexibility of tariffs would result in too much money in companies, and we have no guarantee that the money is used the way it should be. I mean, modernization of the installation. Yes, President, would you please? Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Once again, thank you very much for the invitation. Well, if you allow me, I would like to make a reference to the presentation that you made and the interventions of Mr. Szymczak and Dobrowolski. And based on these things, I would like to present our assessment of the situation of the sector, as well as the challenges faced by the sector. So this is what I would like to talk about. So how the sector would look like in the perspective of 2030 and 2050. So the first thing that I noticed during the presentation, well, I rather wouldn't use the notion of the district heating system sector being dated. No, this sector faces a lot of challenges and it needs to transform continuously because, as you stressed in your presentation correctly, data show that for the last years, a lot has been done by this sector, significantly more than the power sector. So, for example, losses 9 to 11% in grids. This is twice lower than what we had 20 years ago. So this is the level of losses that you would see in the best developed, or even lower than in the best developed heating system in Scandinavia. And obviously, the level of losses also depends on the load on the network. So efficiency of production over 85%. This is a quality jump forward. 20 years ago, it was only 70 plus percent, or around 70% only. And now if we talk about reductions, and here we are very correct in saying it, so the reduction of the so-called high emissions, sulfur, nitrogen, well, without investment, you couldn't achieve it. Even carbon dioxide in this structure, which is included in the data of the regulator analysis, 72%. It also covers the industry. You know, in the heating plants, the coal share is even higher. It's over 80%. So the reduction of CO2 was reduced by 20%, and even decapitalization index in 2002, it was still 55%, whereas today, or rather in 2019, it was 48.8%. So even with limited investment possibilities, the modernization processes in the sector did occur.
When it comes to the challenge that you mentioned, something that Mr. Sprzączak and Dobrowolski mentioned already. Today, the main challenge, but threat at the same time, is first and foremost is the system of trade in CO2 emissions. That directive on combustion above the 50 megawatts, big heating plants, and some plants, specifically in Poland, actually cover 1 to 50 megawatts, and in fact, it is covered by MCP directive, and the standards actually in 2025, 2020, 2030 actually, these standards have to be fulfilled and met by the industry, whereas the abrupt growth in prices to emissions, cost of entitlements to emissions, and bear in mind that the prices of coal grow year on year actually, followed by the information of the Office for Regulation of Energy 2018-2019, it was 6.5% growth of cost of coal, and electric energy grew by 7%. labor grew by another percentage point. So basically, you know, we are in the situation, in the context where in a short period of time, this independent costs accumulated, and we are not able to move away from these costs. And therefore, the next challenge is to increase the share of the renewable energy resources. And as Director mentioned already, we, as the industry, we appreciate the establishment of the Department of Heating industry, that we organize meetings and conferences like the one today. We have meetings actually organized by Minister Polityka, and we do support and we cooperate with the ministry to be ready with the strategy by the end of the quarter. So of course we will discuss the topics related to the mechanism increase of the share of energy, renewable energy resources, efficiency, energy efficiency topics in the perspective of 1 year or maybe 2 years. The definition of the effective productive energy system will change as well. Right now, 80% of the industries do not meet the administrative conditions even, don't actually get to meet that, but because the systems grids are efficient and productive, but they do not have the enough heat coming from the cogeneration from RES or from the waste. So there is yet another challenge today. We have many projects that have been implemented or that are planned for implementation are based actually on the gas fuels. And right now we are ongoing discussion whether gas is going to be a transition fuel, which means that heating systems, co-generation of energy systems, actually this will be able to receive the support from the state funds and EU funds. Let me mention two key documents: the regulation or the draft of RDF regulation. We have an ongoing debate whether gas can be a transition fuel. Right now, the European Parliament and European Commission are negative about it. The Council of the European Council is positive about it. So in March this year, the European Commission established the team of the technical experts that said that actually gas could be transition fuel if the coal in these systems using gas is above 100 is higher. Actually, the high efficient cogeneration is not able to achieve it. So can we make this gas that is now used in the installations more green? Yet another initiative, the letter of intent signed by several entities like our chamber. This was a letter initiated by Minister Polityka to ensure development of biogas, which once purified, and this is the most important factor, because biogas itself directly in the heating system provides like 240 megawatts, not more. But the potential that was actually mentioned, 55,000 of installed capacity, is just nothing. It's drop in the ocean. But if we are able to build the installation of biomethane, so biogas actually, which would be purified from sulfur and CO2, and we get the biogas that would be used in the systems, this will be a great achievement, because then in this fuel, in this fossil fuel, we will have a better, greener systems. So investments and in small systems, medium-sized systems, working for the heating plants, that the ones that are productive, they will also be able actually to meet these ozone-related targets. And now, one more thing, just to mention this challenge related to technology. We know we have to fulfill the renewable energy resources targets. It's now 0.5% now. However, we have to assume that it's realistic that in perspective of 2030, the coal is used at the level of 45%, 20 or 35% of this will be renewable energy resources, and the rest goes for gas. Of course, the rest comes from biomass and the heat pumps and the municipal waste, at least in the part, well, in some part of it, in wastewater waste management systems, wind energy, power to heat energy, but we are not going to do this without storage systems. Storage systems that are more seasonal, not daily storage systems. We only have 2 experimental installations, seasonal installations in Poland. So these storage systems, these warehouses must be developed. Of course, the solar systems, solar panels, of course, they will be used as well. And the low temperature grids. This is then related to thermal modernization of the buildings. It strongly correlates with that, and thermal modernization will allow us actually to move to lower the parameters actually, and to achieve at the target date actually the level of 50/70, because this will also help us to grow the use of RES. The systemic cool, this is yet another thing today that we have to move on with. We now have like 2 or 3 experimental grids, and this development will have to come to play as well. Maybe when we break this cost barrier, maybe not in the residential actually sector, but in the industrial sector, we will have a higher potential. So there will be higher potential for cogeneration, because in summer, based on our resources or sources of energy, we will be able actually to generate cool actually for the that we need actually, and we have to require from ourselves certain work. We have to shift our mindset. We have to come up with the solutions. We have to enter different types of activities based on the activity of the given plant or a facility, outsourced facility, or a totally new, brand new activity. So, for instance, we are discussing with some companies, with operators, to come up with some new ideas. We can actually use gas systems actually to deliver, to supply gas, bigger amounts of gas, and this will be this new type of activity. But to be able to go for it, and here, of course, we are moving to this most important element that we discuss. For all this, we need actually positive financial standing of the enterprises. Without that, even if we had the best legal conditions, not even mentioning regulations related to grids, this is yet a separate piece of discussion. But if we don't ensure this financial standing, even with the greatest systems of support, we won't be able to go for these investments. Let me use some numbers here. Data from the Energy Regulation Office. We have to take the regulation of the sector aspect through the prism of a longer horizon. Of course, the average profitability calculated last year depends on the distribution of costs. We have the operator, we have the heating plant, we have the cogeneration, but profitability is -52%. So it's just negative numbers. So it is important to take this situation from the perspective of many years. So if we start from 22 to 2019, if we analyze all these 17 years, only once in 2016, profitability was at the level that would refer to the usual profitability of other industries. We are also just An economic activity, we are the business, so the profitability in our business was never high. So we functioned, we existed, and we invested only because we did not have this accumulation of these external costs. As we mentioned, they started from 2018, where the costs to emissions was actually growing dramatically. And the analysis of the Energy Regulation Office proved that the liquidity ratios from 2002 amounts to 0.71 to 0.53, where this ratio should be actually at the level of 11. What does this mean? It means that the enterprises today do not have cash anymore. They are lacking in cash. So it's not only the question of their own contribution in the investments, but it is also about the insurance of funds for the current activities. We do appreciate the initiative undertaken by the minister, the guidelines to set tariffs. We plan discussions, we plan workshops, we're getting ready for this exercise, for these discussions, and this is a key aspect from the perspective of making the regulation processes more smooth. Because they have to take place in the current legal state. However, you have to bear into account that the current system of regulations that we have in place, it's been there for 25 years. So these cost regulations that fulfilled its role already when we moved from the economy that would be difficult even to define, this actually process came to an end. We cannot actually remain in the regime of that cost regulation, because this example of dynamic growth and deterioration of the economic situation proved that we do not have money. We simply do not have sufficient money to function and to invest.
So I am not afraid to think about regulations in the context of splitting it from the cost system. I know that you can't do it overnight, and this is also something that we would suggest, even in the prepared strategy. The change of the regulation model shall be divided into two stages. I think the first one may last for a year or two, and it will instantly improve the situation. In what way? I can say it. And the other one, to achieve the target change. Because today you have to apply different thinking categories. I can't imagine a situation in which heating companies will have a contract that concerns not a change of gigajoule, where the price of 1 gigajoule matters. Very often we even forget the cost of housing. I can imagine a model in which we agree to ensure certain thermal standard. On the other hand, our sector differs dramatically from the electricity sector. We can't say we have absolute monopoly here. No, it's rather oligopoly what we see here. And together with the development of technologies, because we are getting more and more competitors, if us, the heat industry, if we don't care for the competitiveness and quality of district heating systems, investors will appear and they will bid solutions, island-like solutions using internal installations in buildings of apartments, and they will take away clients from us. So then we'll have one more very effective regulator, user. Well, thank you very much for your very extensive intervention and very generous use of time to present your point of view. So now I would like to give the floor to President Majkut, and I would like to give you the same opportunity to express of you. Obviously, then I will come back to directors in the second round of questions when you will be able to express your views again. But now, President Majkut, and well, there's a space to make a position vis-a-vis what has been said already. And myself, I'll add one more issue. How do you see it? What is most needed for your industry from the legislator, from the regulator now, and how things are going to change. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I also would like to thank you for invitation to this discussion. First of all, I would like to make a reference to what was said by President Szymczak, who, as always, and we've known each other for more than 10 years, in a way, well, that's not torturing the listeners, but is covering so many subjects associated with the title of the conference. I can agree with Mr. Szymczak. In Poland, we represent E.ON Corporation, but I'm also a head of the Heating and Power Council in Poland, and problems of the industry are not foreign to me. I also would like to make a reference to what you said at the very beginning in your presentation. I think somehow willing to motivate us to discuss things, because to be honest, I don't believe in the black scenarios and the swell of death, and I think that no coal burned furnace will take the position of district heating systems. And I do believe that all the plants will have the time to satisfy the requirements of all EU directives and BAT and other things, because I can't imagine any heating plant starting the year 2023 without meeting the emission requirements and facing the penalties that you mentioned. And well, and now if we say that the black scenario does not concern the heat industry, I would say that life is not a bed of roses. For our industry as well, we do face big challenges, very big transformation is ahead of us. The distance that you talked about in your presentation is really smaller in bigger towns. So big towns, because of the fact that, well, the business in big towns makes it possible to accumulate more financial resources, the distance is smaller to what we need to achieve. And the biggest problems is the problem of small towns. And there, as the council, we analyze the problems of entrepreneurs on a daily basis. However, as the industry, you are not able to solve all the problems of big and small heating entrepreneurs, enterprises. So I would agree with what was said by Minister Polityka. Well, it's really an achievement that the Department of Heating was established. There was a time when we were maltreated, treated worse than the electricity providers, and now things have changed and the dialogue takes place at this level, and the dialogue has been joined or initiated by the energy regulation offers by the regulator. And I think that in this triangle, the industry, the ministry, the regulator, this is the triangle that can solve most of the problems of the heating industry in future. Well, the problems basically can be described in a simple way. We are going to see big investments, and the big investments require from the companies that will undertake them to be financially healthy, and financial health of the company depends on how it thinks about regulations. One concept of regulations we have, or we stick to the regulation system that was established 20 years ago, or perhaps we are trying to sort of think it over. And also, when you look at how heating systems and the heating industry, how it's regulated by other countries, but by heat prices themselves, you cannot do it all. You cannot cover all the needs of the industry. And obviously, in cooperation, the ministry, in cooperation with the European Commission, will have to establish structures and support systems so that not all of the costs are transferred on the customers, and it's possible only when we have access to resources, national or EU resources that would take off the burden. I'm not saying 100% of the burden, but part of the burden associated with the investment, and it has been happening so far. E.ON companies use the resources of the National Environment Protection Fund in a quite extensive way. However, what awaits us is a significant increase in the size of investments. Only with this we'll be able to meet decarbonization targets. So the dialogue that runs between the ministry, the regulator, and the industry produces results, and making new law and making new regulation system is very important, as well as the support system. We really rely on it. And if I were to say something about your question, so the perspective, well, it has already been said by Dr. Szymczak, us, the heating guys, we have to forget the old bad habits, because for dozens of years we operated in a system in which per town we had a single heating plant and a single heating system. And I think that in future, and it's not going to be remote future, things will change drastically. The system may remain, but it will be surrounded by a range of isolated, small, low parameter systems. And it's effective because less energy is used. So lower parameter systems are being built in Poland, and one of them is the newly built facilities on the island between the left and right arm of the Oder river in Szczecin town. The 5th generation heating systems are being built, and everybody who establishes the unit there will be linked to the third generation generation system. And I would say that decentralization is a perspective, and it's not a remote one. I think that nobody would question decarbonization, just the question natural gas, because for sure it will be a kind of interim fuel. Processes have started, and now a group of companies, more than 10 cogenerations are being planned or built. And I guess that my colleagues, heating specialists, have similar perspectives. So a part of coal for sure will be replaced by natural gas. For how long? Well, it will really depend on how much the EU will declare that, and also how quickly natural gas shall be out of the fuel mix of the EU. So the question, well, President Szymczak used this, well, a possible solution will make the natural gas greener. Perhaps to some extent it's possible. I'm thinking about biogas plants that would purify methane in biological processes. The gas would be put into the gas network, but I don't think it would be a product or a solution that would fully replace the whole gas system in Poland. So I think it will be just making the gas greener and not turning it into a renewable source per se. Certain hope, but very remote, and this is the hope of the EU and Germans, hydrogen, green hydrogen. Today, it's a lot more costly than regular renewable energy for heat production. Today, because we have seen it over the last 10 years or so, a significant decrease in solar energy system prices. And if we have the same speed of change in ecological hydrogen, maybe in a couple of years or a dozen or so of years, we'll be able to talk about it. But now it's still a pilot kind of project. And I think that another, well, decentralization, decarbonization, to the 3D, definitely digitalization, because the local islands of low temperature systems and multiple sources, not just one coal, but multiple sources linked with the system, and so one human energy dispatch. It won't be possible. So digitalization is needed. So digitalization of heating system management is a must, and we'll definitely see it. And it will also generate investments. Thus, this is the third D. And in our E.ON company, we use the fourth D, but only in English. You can use it because it's densification of the cities in which we operate. In cities when we operate, in the centers, in the heating systems, there are very many facilities that are still supplied in an old way. And it's not our system that's old. These are the centers of towns that are supplied. There are certain buildings that still use individually coal, or instead of coal, people burn other things in the ovens. This is the main cause of smoke in our towns. And it's also a challenge for us, the heat industry, but it's also the challenge for the owners and also the city mayors that have to think and find resources for renovations, for improvement of energy efficiency, and also the problem of energy poverty underlined in your report comes to play. I don't know whether legal solutions would be just about doubling the role of the welfare support, but any solution will be good, because the centers of towns that us would like to feed with district heating systems, even if they get modernized to the modern condition, for the people living there, it might be not affordable to heat the flats properly, and we have to find a good solution. So shorter than Szymczak, but still we play in the same field. And I guess that these perspectives, all of us, we are familiar with them. And well, as you can see, we are running the dialogue and it's going quite quickly. So most probably next year, we will see big changes in the heating system, in the legal system, regulations, and it will be continued with good changes in the heating system itself, so that we are not afraid of the black scenario and as well of the. Thank you very much indeed. Well, maybe I was sort of frightening everyone with the black scenario, at least interpreting the data of the regulator for today. Well, today is not very probable. However, you cannot exclude this fact, perhaps during the very quick changes in the environment policy and CO2 issues. So perhaps in smaller towns, certain problems will appear. However, it was just the reference to what you said, President. And now we will still have more than 10 minutes to the end of the debate. So for those that are watching us, there's an opportunity to briefly ask questions. But now I would like to turn to Director Sprzączak, and I would like to ask you about the acceleration of the transformation from the point of view of support systems, because this plot was mentioned by President Majkut in his presentation. And can you see space to make any new dedicated support system for the heat that based fully on renewable energy? Or perhaps we'll keep on using the mechanisms that exist today, and from this point of view, that the process of change will go faster and faster, and as seen the path and its end in the mid-century, you as a legislator, you will not shift the burden more and more from gas cogeneration into renewable sources of energy, and wouldn't it require any dedicated system? Director, please.
There is only one answer to this question. We have to. It's not a question, shall we or should we, but it's just we have to go for it. Let's bear in mind that in this new financial perspective in R&D regulation that was mentioned here, there are ongoing debates on that. How we should approach natural gas. As Mr. Szymczak already stressed, the European Commission is against it. European Parliament is against support gas. They treat it as the fossil fuel. And in Poland, we still used to say that it's low emission. Gas is a low emission fuel. I think it's a Polish specificity that refers to a different starting point when it comes to our energy mix. Therefore, as we believe we can, from this perspective, we can call it the low emission actually fuel, but when we discuss with the EU, it will not it will not work simply. So Poland is analyzing the possibility to fund the most efficient energy sources that actually are the most productive, most efficient in the production of energy based on the one unit of energy, so efficient cogeneration system. And as we believe this is the best, the most justified actually way to use the fossil fuel we can even imagine. This discussion is, however, quite difficult, and right now it is difficult actually to say which direction is going to take. But what we can say now is that in the future perspective, there will be actually money for funds for the renewable energy resources, and we'll have to use them. We have to propose mechanisms that actually will be welcomed by the entities, by the businesses, enterprises, so that the money is to be used not only on biomass, because right now this 9%, according to the president of the Office of Energy Regulation for renewable energy resources, and just in the heating system, it's just approximately 4%. So this amount is about biomass. It's biomass combustion, and we have to move away from that slightly, because when it comes to the potential of biomass, it is limited as well. I believe that biomass import is not a solution that from the European perspective will be seen as sustainable. Therefore, I believe that other sources should get the priority. I don't want to exclude anything here. It's not about exclusion of any technologies, but the heating industry must take a broader perspective, and I'm glad actually to hear what Mr. President Mike said, that in Szczecin, in the city of Szczecin, we already have first attempts to use these systems of the 5th generation. I believe this is the direction we should follow, and the future financial perspective. This is this time when we have to design such solutions and get ready for making these systems based on the solar energy heat pumps or use of waste heat. Let me mention two aspects here when it comes to the heating systems and the effective cogeneration based on gas. We are amending the law of the cogeneration right now. We are discussing this topic because we see that from the perspective of the market, the interest in this support mechanism is not very big. It's limited by a certain framework of restrictions imposed on us by the European Commission in the decision for the state aid, and certain things cannot be avoided, but we are trying actually to move away from this red tape, this bureaucratic approach to be able to use this money, because the system is mainly focused on the smaller heating plants and smaller actually sources up to 50 megawatts, and the big units, the cogeneration units in the biggest actually Polish cities, they went to the power market. So basically, we have to change the model so this gas biogeneration can exist. In my assessment, it can actually still exist for a long time. And the fact that actually this unit is working for 30 years, or has been working for 30 years already, it still can be used for some years to come. So this will require some extra installations. As President already said, we require the systems for the storage of energy or the heat, flexible ability to use actually the cogeneration units to make them work longer than these 3,500-4,000 hours, because right now in full capacity they can work only 50% of their time. So we should make the system more flexible. This is the most important thing, and actually we should move actually the demand for power to change the production auto to make the heating plants actually generating more energy. This will be our direction. Right now, electric energy. We produce a lot of electric energy, but we should produce even more. All the more that heat and power plants or power plants are distributed throughout Poland, and they could play significant role in stabilizing the energy system on the local level, where the renewable energy resources will gain their importance as well. And of course, in the longer time horizon, the installation should be ready to get the decarbonized gas. When it comes to biomethane, there are no big changes between biomethane and the natural gas. Of course, we are talking about purified biomethane. The differences are not that big. When it comes to hydrogen, there is a higher level challenge. The hydrogen mix will have to be actually technically verified. What is the percentage allowed actually to be used in the grid? So the whole EU will move towards direction of blending hydrogen and natural gas. Well, yes or not, this is an ongoing discussion. This discussion have not reached the conclusions yet. The direction has not been chosen yet. So I believe that the cogeneration gas units will the role play still. Whether they will be supported by the EU money or not, this is an open issue still, but definitely it's not going to be as broad approach as it used to be in the previous financial perspective. What we have to bear in mind, however, is what we have to ensure is actually the big back office for the heating plants, so that they can the good practices, they can copy the models of the integration of the renewable energy resources, and they should also use this kind of consulting services to let them use the money. Director, thank you very much for this interesting statement. I would like to refer to the small heating plants. The program for the municipal heating systems implemented by the National Environment Protection Fund and Water Management Fund. So this is a program that has been launched recently, some time ago actually. What are you going to do with it? What are you planning actually? We'll see what the selection of applications will be, or do you already have a perspective? You know what to do about this program? Well, the conditions actually have changed now. For instance, the access to funds is more attractive. We lowered the threshold when it comes to actually contribution of the municipalities in terms of funds, of course, 70 to 50%. So we're listening to the industry, we're listening to the market. I'm glad actually that we have this dialogue, this triangle between the industry, regulator, and the ministry. I hope that working together we will be able to avoid these black scenarios and help the sector. However, we are not ready yet actually what to say about what is the direction for this municipal heating program. Definitely the needs for the funds are huge. Program has been assessed in a positive way. Therefore, I believe it will be continued and the money for heating industry will be found. Thank you, Director. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we have some minutes left. I have a question from the audience, from Mr. Śniegowski, addressed at the Director Dobrowolski. I can't see him on the screen. I've just heard he's with us still. Yes. Director, there is a following question. You mentioned that you are for approval of the cost of heat that actually includes eligible costs. I wonder why you publish every year the maximum increase of ratios that move away from the market conditions and do not provide the possibilities to cover eligible costs. Are you going actually to plan to change this actually starting from 2021? I think this is the last question and the last intervention. Let's make a differentiation between two aspects. So, These aspects were actually the subject of a lengthy discussion with the operators. The question of costs, accounting costs, the costs actually that the facility can see as eligible justified costs from the perspective of the financial policy, accounting policy. So the eligible costs according to the president of the Energy Regulation Office. These are the costs that has to be incurred to be able to implement certain to run a certain business operations, business activities. So the president of the office has to evaluate how this entity will happen what will happen actually if they work in their market conditions. We believe that the heating industry is a local monopoly system. So these conditions must be actually evaluated and recreated actually in the best possible accuracy. So the model of the return on capital, the model that we use now, as it is the model to establish a simplified tariff for the affected entities. They fall under 4A model. Based on that, we set also tariffs that are not that effective, and this is the 4B model. So we do not actually foresee any changes in these models, and as I believe we need at least a year, 2021, to sit together to think what has to be changed in the model, but we have to also focus on the fact that the investments that we made, money that we allocated, no matter actually what were the results of these investments, we have to think what will be our strategy. The same goes for the heat and power systems. So we have to make actually, we have to also make the enterprises accountable for the investments. So in the recent years, when the cost of coal and CO2 costs actually changed, we were use the model respectively. It was not actually that we were very stringent while using the model. So it happened that sometimes increase of costs was much higher than actually resulting from the 4B model. So this is a situation where has to be discussed yet. So the heating plants following the certain plants actually never actually their results never actually dropped by certain percentage. There were some years actually where we have very negative, however, actually results. Sometimes we had more positive results, but it's only a question of a certain evaluation. We have to say it's not just an average economic activity. This is a certain public activity, and we have to take it respectively. We'll have to think how to motivate the enterprises for investments. However, it's not going to be actually a direct translation into the current binding costs. And we want actually the heating systems, and that was discussed for such a long time, 8 years already. We want actually the heating plants to think how to store the heat and how to co-generate and how to provide additional services for the systems, because the small co-generation, this can be an element that would neutralize the fact that the wind in the installations are not always predictable. Sometimes photovoltaic actually installations, when we have a day like today in Warsaw, the generation, the heat generation does not is not actually happening. So basically, we have to think about some additional solutions. Maybe in photovoltaic installations, you have to add some other systems to help you to generate heat. And these investments will be used for that. And the heating plants should also provide this additional energy, services. They will sell the energy and they will offer additional services. So we have to take a flexible approach, and this approach will have to be implemented in the upcoming 2-3 years. Well, thank you very much. I just received Katarzyna Szczyńska saying that we have time. We have another 15 minutes, so we can finish with the second round of questions. So let me now address Mr. Szymczak. You said that it was great that Energy Regulation Office published information on tariffs. Mr. Sprzączak said that the ministry is going actually to support back office actually for the heating industry by informing about their capacities to integrate their systems with the renewable energy resources. So this information policy will change. So I will ask you about this plan actually, how the industry actually perceives this initiative, and where else we have a need actually to better inform the public, to better actually use this support mechanism like the cogeneration system. Of course, we are waiting for the amendment of the law so that from the administrative side, it is also easier. But also at the stage of informing the industries, the enterprises, how to actually, what to apply for, how to fill up the documents. There is a lot to be done.
Well, you know that regulations, or rather guidelines, were published, and there's space to discuss the guidelines, because these guidelines are very well positioned in the change of the model that we are discussing. So first, these changes should be, inverted commas, quick, and they wouldn't require significant legislative changes. In consequence, will significantly improve the situation of companies vis-a-vis possibility to make investments, and will have time to develop a model, the target regulation model. And as for the guidelines, the objective is to accelerate the regulation processes, which in spite of the last 20 years usually on average take over 3 months. Certain tariff procedures take between 6 and 12 months. So companies are not able to transfer the costs that are justified. Thus, these guidelines will help it, I hope, shorten the decision time, and also they should make it possible to eliminate certain issues that are unclear, unprecise, differently interpreted by enterprises and the regulator. Well, sometimes the difference in the approach can be even seen in different branches of the regulation office over the same issue. So making the procedures more homogeneous is very important for enterprises. They should have the clarity how to make the applications, how to present costs, how to approach repairs, modernization, CO2, remuneration. This is very important indeed, because you can't compare remuneration levels like one-to-one in different companies. Well, very often the salary, the remuneration in a company is a good proof of the profitability and the standard of the company. So we can't compare these things one-to-one. This is the matter of coal trading. This is a very important thing associated with how the regulator approaches, for example, contract with the Polish mining PGG group, and the situation on the market today when we have significantly cheaper imported coal. Well, this notion is not limited to regulations only. It has a general economic character. But well, obviously such a discussion, because this is the most topical issue, yes? Well, now we are talking about it because it's such a burning subject. We would like to discuss what, in our opinion, is missing in the guidelines, what should also be included so that we can meet the target they identify with. Simplification of the regulation system. And this is something that Director Dobrowolski mentioned. The 4A pattern, maybe I'm getting too detailed, but it's a very important issue, and the people from the industry are perfectly aware of it. Our position is the 4A pattern developed by the regulator. This is I'm making it very, very simple. This is the level of pricing that's accepted by the regulator and by the user. Anything below it, it should be the room to play for companies to lower the cost, to improve profitability. So we would like to discuss about these elements that I hope will be covered by the guidelines, because these matters doesn't require any update to the regulations. They only require making a common position, adopting a common approach, a very precious and very important initiative. And now to refer to cogeneration. Well, obviously, Director Szymczak mentioned it, and it's very important. He also listened to the opinions of the industry. What can be done? What can be improved, especially by eliminating certain administrative barriers by, again, making things simply. So cogeneration, on the one hand, and so when we have the energy trading, we have more parties trading, and also more frequent announcements. Because, for example, we noticed it in one situation. There was an announcement once or twice. There is a solution when one big cogeneration installation eliminates the possibility of other smaller participants from joining the project. So if auctions are increased in number, it's not yet it. Administrative decisions that are required or not to submit documents. These are important issues because, for example, we have to improve the competitiveness target that stems from EU regulations, but the barriers and the change of the amendment document, definitely they will result in a greater number of companies that would join the system. Thank you very much for your intervention. And last but not least, President Majkut, if you would please take the floor, because I could see that you rose your hand. Well, yes, obviously we are talking about the situation across the industry, and it sort of differs in case of enterprises that belong to energy group like E.ON or PGE Eoria, because of the financial power. They have sort of better position. However, we are talking about the whole industry, and out of all the companies in country, most of them are still belonging to the cities, and they don't have the financial comfort because municipalities don't have any financial comfort, especially recently. So for them, the burden of transformation is huge. And I would like to appreciate the initiative of Director Sprzączak, who talked about making a kind of back office that would support, at least, well, with know-how, that would support transformation of these companies that don't have such resources. And I think that President Szymczak wouldn't say no. To a certain extent, Polish Heating Council is a kind of back office now, playing this role of a back office, especially if the dialogue with the ministry is as good as it was before. And we'll try to help all enterprises, even the smaller enterprises, to go through the necessary transformation. And as Director Dobrowolski said, profitability of heat plants is just above 0.6% in fact. So with this level of profitability, if you are a municipal establishment without access to private resources, are you able to finance cogeneration solutions? And it's a must if you want to reduce the cost, if you want to increase profit. So when you have the profitability of 1.6, problem, and when you have no big budget on the side of the town. President, thank you very much for your intervention, and also all you gentlemen, we would like to thank you for taking part in the webinar. In my opinion, it was a very interesting discussion and multi-faceted discussion. Well, Polish heating industry is a sleeping giant, and I hope it will wake up in the nearest future and will be able to support the transformation of the whole economy and the heating sector above all, so that we could go on to the way to climate neutrality. The discussion will continue, we'll take part in it, and I encourage you all, ladies and gentlemen, to register in the Polityka Inside platform. PA Energy is especially something that I would like to highlight. Every day we write about how Polish heating sector is changing, how regulations are changing. And thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much for sharing your views with us. So see you soon. Thank you.